Okay, we're gonna do the week in review, Boiler Mechanic World Week in Review. Uh, don't really have any kind of monologue this week, but there's some interesting things going on this week. First thing that happened is earlier in the week. In the beginning of the week, we had Israel basically staring down at Rafah, getting ready to attack Rafah, which is basically the last enclave where all of the displaced Gazan refugees are staying at, and this was a big concern in the beginning of the week. What's interesting is the United States, some spokesman within the United States, I think it was one of the State Department people, said that's an absolute red line. We won't let you bomb Rafah. And the Israelis started bombing Rafah anyway and started doing some raids and I guess special forces and raids operations in there. And the United States kind of walked back and said, well, they're in Rafah. So the United States set a red line essentially. And after Israel went in, the United States said, oh, well, it seems to me, based on what we're seeing here, that something got through to Israel, to the Israeli government, because I haven't heard about a wholesale slaughter. So they must be taking some kind of precautions, which is good. Thank God they're finally doing that. At the beginning of the week, people thought that they were going to go into Rafah and kill thousands and thousands of people because you literally have a tent city over there, as I mentioned last week, in some of these open areas. Okay, right here, all over here. I've seen the pictures of it. They're available online. It's pretty amazing. So there was that concern at the beginning of the week. One of these stories. They had this story about captives being freed. I guess that was supposed to be some propaganda thing. But they did end up killing a few hundred civilians, but it wasn't nearly as bad as people thought it would be, for what that's worth. God bless the people of Gaza. Here we have an article talking about how the United States kind of appeared to set a red line at the beginning of the week and then kind of walked that back. But again, it seems to me like something got through to the Israeli government somewhere through some back channel, because it's not nearly as bad from what I see as I expected it. At least I haven't seen or heard reports that show it to be as bad as people thought it would be. So there was a lot of international pressure, and Israel backed off a little bit, and that's good. At least they found a piece of their soul somewhere. It's nice to hear. Another interesting situation, which is it's starting to get my attention, is Congo. So we're starting to see earlier in the week the president of, or the government of Congo, accused the Rwandan army of using surface-to-air missiles, I guess against Congolese airplanes, both civilian and military. Advanced weaponry, they called it. So the UN actually made that report. I take that back. Congo probably told the UN, and UN issued a report. And then later in the week, this story pops up. DR Congo accuses Rwanda of airport drone attack in Goma area. This is where all of the issues, right over here actually. Where is Goma? Goma's down here, I believe. Wherever Lake Kivu is at. Yeah, Goma, right here. So most of the issues, I believe the M23 rebels, which are basically Rwandan troops in disguise, have taken over this town of Sake, and everybody's all the refugees are going into Goma. Now I kind of smell shenanigans here. The election last December, there was a candidate put forth who was obviously a Western backed candidate. this area of Congo is very mineral rich. It's in the Great Rift Valley. It's some of the most rich mineral deposits in the world for all sorts of metals, rare earth metals, gold, silver, you name it, they got it in this area. Rwanda has some ties to the West as well. A lot of investment and development from the West, from tech companies I've seen, goes into Rwanda. So it seems to me that Rwanda is developing this relationship with the West. It's actually cleaned up quite a bit. There's a interesting dictator there. I forget his name, but an interesting dictator, and he seems to be supported by the West. You see a lot of Western companies coming in here, setting up shop. Amazon. I've heard of different ones. I forget which ones. So there's something going on with Rwanda. They're sending their troops into Congo, and then once these troops cross the border into Congo, they call themselves M23. But they are Rwandan troops, and everybody knows it. They're starting to find advanced weaponry. They're starting to use advanced weaponry. Where they're getting this weaponry, who knows? Maybe they already had it. Who knows? I smell shenanigans here. The West is a bit lukewarm on the president who just won re-election. He's a big, imposing guy, and once in a while he says mean things to European leaders. That's about it. He's a politician. He's a talker. He's a bullshitter. But he hasn't been so much of a kiss ass to Western leaders. I think a couple years ago or last year, he embarrassed Macron at a press conference. So this guy, Tashigi, I believe is his name. Don't ask me how to pronounce his name. He's a big, imposing dude. And the West is definitely lukewarm on him. They put forth a candidate last year against him that was obviously a Western candidate. The election got a lot of attention. Of course, there was fraud claimed. There was claims of fraud, etc., etc. So I think that there are shenanigans going on in Congo. There are Western interests here that want this area secured from Congo. They don't trust the current government of Congo. They probably think that the current government of Congo is too close to China, yada, yada, yada. Same story, different thing. We're seeing this story all across Africa as the modern Race for Africa Part 2 begins, or is well underway, actually. Also in Africa, I just was browsing Tanzanian news, and I'm a fan of Tanzania. I didn't realize that they have a female president who also happens to be Muslim, so very progressive, as a matter of fact. Here's a story about them developing ties with Iran. Tanzania is a quiet powerhouse of a country with so much potential, I think. A lot of Western expatriates, African Americans who want to go back to the motherland, end up going to Tanzania. One of the more developed countries, also been traditionally very close to Russia, China, etc. Tanzania is a country to watch. That's why I included it here. The African Summit is going on starting today, I believe today. Here's a video of the proceedings today, I think. Senegal continues to have issues. Basically, the Western-backed president is now in the process of becoming a Western-backed dictator, I guess, because he keeps postponing the elections because he can't find a successor that he likes. Basically, the West is talking out of both sides of their mouth, saying, oh, you need to follow the rule of law, please. But, in fact, they want this guy to find a good successor, someone that is also going to be a Western puppet, basically, is what it seems like. People are getting pissed there, so there's been some low-intensity protests, nothing huge yet, but this situation can boil over. Other than that, that looks like it's it in Africa. This relates to Gaza. So, because of the Rafah situation, South America filed an emergency petition with the ICJ, essentially saying, oh my God, they're going to go into Rafah. You have to do something now. International Court of Justice. International Court of Justice rejected the emergency petition because they said, we've already told what they have to do. We're going to come back to this at the scheduled time a month from last month's hearing. They know what they have to do. There's no need to issue an emergency injunction. There's nothing else we can do. Essentially, there's nothing else they can do at this point. All they can do is sit there and watch, wait for the next court hearing, see what Israel presents as their proof that they have complied with the orders of the court, and the court will then issue their judgment as to a recommendation for the Security Council. So that's what's going to happen. This was all kind of procedural optic stuff. Interestingly enough, a lawsuit was filed in Netherlands over the sale of F-35. Was it even the sale or the storage? Okay, the storage of F-35 parts in the Netherlands. I believe they're American parts, but they're stored in the Netherlands that are being sent to Israel. And the plaintiffs said that Netherlands could not be involved in this genocide. Giving parts to the Israelis implicates us in the genocide. So there was some human rights group that filed this case, and the court actually ordered Netherlands to stop supplying parts for the F-35 to Israel. So that's pretty wild. That came kind of out of nowhere. EU is still looking for a way to use the money seized, the Russian assets, the reserves essentially of Russia that were seized, and they're trying to find a way to use it as collateral. Instead of seizing it outright, they're trying to do something halfway in terms of using it as collateral to make money, which is also illegal and just as bad as taking the assets outright. If banks are going to have assets seized by political bodies because the political body doesn't like the politics of another nation, then that is going to destroy trust in the banking system in that umbrella underneath that political body, in this case the EU. France has a syphilis situation going on. Apparently syphilis cases have gone up over 100% since 2020, I believe. So I found that interesting. Medical marijuana bill passed in Ukraine. In 6 months, they will have medical marijuana. How progressive. But speaking of Ukraine, very important with Ukraine, there was another story, by the way, which I don't know where it's at. I think it's underneath. These two are close together. Big news today. The city of Adiievka right here. This city has been taken by the Russians. This was perhaps, some people are saying this was perhaps the most fortified city in the world. The Ukrainians got this city in 2016. Since the war started in 2014, it switched hands a couple times. The Ukrainians finally got hold of it in 2016. They fortified the shit out of it. They put artillery here, and they started launching artillery into the city of Donetsk, killing civilians. And this is a big reason why Vladimir Putin started the war. For those people in the West who haven't heard any of this, this is a big reason. So that Adiievka was taken, which really reduces the ability of the Ukrainians to launch artillery at civilians in Donetsk. This is a big deal. It seems like the Ukrainian army is in disarray. The thing about Adiievka is it was so heavily fortified, but the Russians took it relatively quickly. They took it much faster than they took Bakhmut. Once they really started getting it surrounded, the position fell apart very quickly. And if you look behind Adiievka, there's some rivers back here. There's some rail lines around. There's a lake or two here. But there's really not much. There's some natural barriers, but they don't have any real prepared fortifications back here. So this could be the beginning of an advance, I'm thinking. The Ukrainian army seems to be in disarray. Zelensky, in true Zelensky fashion, took off and went to Europe on a foreign trip, which he did a couple other times already when things were getting hot. So this Ukraine is really a basket case right now. It's really a shit show. There's no telling what can happen. We can have a coup tomorrow. We can have assassinations. The military is completely demoralized. The Azov battalion, which is one of the NAZI battalions, was sent into Adiievka to try and control the situation, and they went in there for like a day, and then they left. They said, this is crazy. We're not going to sit here and die. And then once Azov basically refused to follow orders and try and secure the situation there, that's when morale just fell apart, and all of the soldiers just started taking off. And they're totally surrounded, probably right now. They're surrounded like this, like all the way around here, and they can get through these fields here, but there's fire control everywhere. So they're probably trying to escape, and they're probably getting massacred on the way out. The smart ones would, at this point, would stay in Adiievka undercover and surrender. Get their white flag out, tear a piece of their t-shirt off, and put it up. There's no chance for them. So some of the other ones, there's a disorganized retreat going on. There's no way they're going to be able to make it out of there alive. It's going to be a massacre. So Adiievka has fallen. That's a big deal. Perhaps the biggest, most pivotal victory for the Russians yet. So that's a big deal. That really changes the optics of the war in a big way. Russia issues an arrest warrant for the Prime Minister of Estonia, I think. Who is this lady? Kaja Kallas, who has been in the news a lot. She's one of these hot, young Scandinavian/Baltic female leaders that have been in vogue recently. And she's quite the war hawk. I mean, she may look kind of innocent, but she seems like quite the psychopath based on what her policies are. Constantly trying to provoke the Russians. It's really quite crazy. So this little sweetheart right here, quite a dangerous woman, and because I guess she tore down Soviet monuments or something like that in Estonia, she had Soviet monuments torn down, so the Russians issued an arrest warrant for her. I guess. I mean, it's their country. I don't know why Russia would issue an arrest warrant. Maybe they see it as their property. I guess the Estonians could have, or wherever she's from, Latvia or Lithuania, I guess they could have returned the monuments if they wanted to. But it's on their territory, so I don't know. Russia was just looking for a reason to issue an arrest warrant for her, I guess. But she's quite the sociopath for the way she looks. So apparently Armenia came out and said, no, we're not against Russia. We're just diversifying our diplomatic ties. Yeah, no one really believes that. They're kind of pivoting to the West. I think a lot of this, by the way, has to do with, my hunch is that there's a huge Armenian community in places like California. I think a lot of these people I think these people in California and elsewhere around the world that are Armenia diaspora, a lot of them are very rich. I think they're having an outsized influence in Armenia, and this might be part of the reason why Armenia is kind of going sideways right now. Pakistan had the elections. Former Premier Sharif Muza, I forget his first name. He's been around for a while. He's going to be the coalition leader now. I think his son is in there somewhere. And the Imran Khan party is basically going to be in the minority, is what it looks like. There was a big farmers' protest, which I didn't know about, in India, which I've heard about happening. It's not unheard of, it's not unusual, but traffic got completely snarled. And from what I've seen of Delhi online, as far as the traffic, it's already bad enough as it is. But yeah, they were having a bad time in Delhi. Look how polluted that place is. It is a hellhole. I've just heard people just talk about India. You either love it or you hate it. So that's what happened. They're having their farmers protest. Now they do it quite often. It's not anything. I remember hearing about farmers protests a couple years ago, so it's not anything unusual for them. China opening up free. Okay, so this article really talks about why China is reopening visa-free rules for a lot of European countries and a lot of Asian countries, but Japan and the UK are not being allowed, are given the same freedom. So that's interesting. Now, we all know that the UK are a bunch of Weasley cutthroat, subversive assholes. Japan has an interesting history and has an interesting relationship with China. It has deep economic ties, but believe it or not, what happened in World War II, the Chinese still haven't forgotten about that. People don't realize how badly Japan treated China during World War II. Some people would argue that what the Japanese did to the Chinese is worse than the Nazis did to the Russians or to the Jewish people. That's a bit of a stretch to say to the Jewish people because the Nazis tried to exterminate them. But what Japan did to China was pretty brutal. It pretty much one of the most brutal things in history. So the Chinese still haven't forgotten about that. But at the same time, they have very deep economic ties. So it's very interesting. Obviously, Japan, being a puppet state of the United States, is also going to have to be antagonistic to China, at least on the surface. There was a situation where I guess Taiwan has bases, which, this is really quite remarkable. Taiwan has bases. I don't know why it's not right around here. Since I can't zoom in, it's not letting me zoom in. Right around here, there's a couple islands, and actually that's Taiwan's property right next to the coast. And apparently there's been incidents with fishermen out here, Chinese fishermen fishing, and the Taiwanese Coast Guard comes and harasses them. And this time, 2 fishermen died because the Taiwan Coast Guard came over and harassed these fishermen and capsized their boats, and 2 of them died apparently. So very but good. That was a real smooth move. Taiwan is another, basically becoming a client state of the United States. Maybe they're going to be the next Ukraine. I don't know. It seems like they're kind of on that trajectory. However, in the last election, the pro-United States party lost a little bit of ground. So maybe people in Taiwan are starting to understand that they're being used by the United States, and eventually the United States may want them to pull a Ukraine and suicide themselves in order to attack the Chinese. I hope they figure it out before then, because it'll be every bit as bad as Ukraine, if not worse for them. Indonesia, Tanzania. That was from the Tanzanian or Indonesian news. There was an election. Oh, yeah, here goes the election. There was an election for president. Big deal. Indonesia, very important country. 4th most populous country in the world. Largest, I think, most populated Muslim country in the world. Majority Muslim country. This guy was actually, he's been around for a long time. He was, interestingly enough, under the Suharto dictatorship, he was a military guy. He's been accused of engaging in crimes against humanity during the dictatorship that lasted up until, I believe, the 90s. A lot of Americans don't realize that there was actually a genocide in Indonesia in the 60s, and there's a lot of evidence to point to the fact that the United States assisted the government in the genocide. The CIA did, and there was a certain Ann Dunham, who just happened to be there at the time when the CIA was involved in assisting the Suharto regime in the basically genocide of political opposition. So there's that. But this isn't a big deal. I'm sure he's going to probably be a milquetoast kind of guy. We'll see how he deals with the multipolarity situation with China and Russia. Is he going to try and balance his relationship, or is he going to be more pro-West? We'll see. Australian Parliament really took the strongest action yet in trying to do something about the Julian Assange situation. I shouldn't have to tell anybody about Julian Assange. Julian Assange is the most persecuted journalist in our modern times. He's a hero, and they're trying to kill him right now. They're trying to he's in prison in the UK, and he's supposed to be extradited to the United States. For what? No one's really sure, because there's not really a case against him, a good case on him. But this is the first time the Australian Parliament has actually opened their mouth and stopped being bitches, so that's nice, because he is an Australian citizen. Australian Trade Minister asked China to lift barriers, query a Wang sentence. Okay, so this is just that during COVID, a lot of trade restrictions were put on China by Australia, and a lot of diplomatic actions were done. So then China returned the favor by barring the import of certain Australian products. And so here we have the trade minister begging China to allow their markets, Australian products, back into the Chinese market. At the same time, these people will sit here and go on TV and talk about China, talk shit about China all day. These people are all foolish clowns. Even in Australia. Australia seems to have a political class every bit as retarded as the United States and Europe. Mexican regulators tell Amazon. So this is basically a antitrust situation. Basically, Mexican regulators are saying, Amazon, you have too much of the market and you're going to have to stop. This is happening around the world with Amazon Prime and with Amazon products. So I think there's cases in Europe that are similar. Haiti continues to have a bad time. The Kenyan mission is not following through. The mission where Kenya was going to send 1,000 police officers to Haiti, which that wouldn't have done much good anyway, in my opinion, but that was the plan. Well, Kenya's not going to do that. I highly doubt it. I forgot to even mention that Kenya is having issues with debt right now, fiscal issues. They have to take more money from the IMF, apparently. So I doubt that's going to happen, even if somehow they find a way around what the court decided in Kenya, which the court in Kenya decided that Kenya could not send a police force or military force or any kind of force to Haiti. It was against their constitution. On that note, there was a Kenyan official, the guy who was supposed to lead the force into Haiti. He was found dead in his hotel room in D.C. Now, whenever somebody's found dead in their hotel room in D.C., I take it with I can't help but suspect some kind of shenanigans. Okay, so that's an interesting story. Yeah, then we have this whole weird sort of hysteria that some officials in the United States started over space nukes, the Russians having nuclear missiles in space and all this. Complete nonsense. Just once and for all, Nuclear weapons in space is not practical. It's just not a practical thing to do. Why would you put nuclear weapons into orbit? You can just launch them from the ground and get them anywhere you want in the world within minutes, especially if you have hypersonics. One thing that you can do in space, and they've talked about this before, where I was on a space earlier today, a Twitter Spaces, where they were talking about this, the rods of God, which are this idea of putting big, heavy tungsten rods in space, and you can deorbit those, and they'll hit the Earth with such kinetic energy and such force, it'll be like a nuclear bomb without the actual radiation. But putting nuclear weapons in space is unnecessary. It's impractical. There's no reason why you would want to put nuclear weapons in space. And this is going back to America, with that America is so stuck on its Hollywood propaganda. There was a movie years ago, I think it was in the 90s, with Tommy Lee Jones, and there was a nuke in space, and it's like, really? No, there's no nukes in space. There's no reason to put nukes in space. Why would you launch a nuke in space and leave it up there? Why not just let it go to continue its course? It's just stupid. It makes no sense. But that's America. America thinks the world is a movie, that life is a movie. So it was in a movie somewhere. So then we have government officials saying this to scare people, and people believe it. Interesting story here. I found this story interesting. This was a good article from Reuters, I believe, talking about sort of the DEA's interactions with Ecuadorian police over the years, and how the DEA, really, they're having a little squabble with local Ecuadorian police, and the new Ecuadorian government that was just elected is asking the DEA, can you please come back and help us? And the DEA is like, no, you guys were mean to us, and by the way, we don't care about cocaine anymore. That was interesting. In this article, is they're saying, well, the DEA is not going to go to Ecuador to help them with cocaine trafficking, because the DEA is not really focused on cocaine right now. They're just focused on fentanyl. So there's kind of a bureaucratic squabble going on, because the Ecuadorians took credit for a drug bust that the DEA helped them with, and they didn't really give the DEA credit. And so the DEA is all pissed off about that. And that's how bureaucracies work. They get really pissed off about this stuff. So that's part of it. And the other part of it is they don't care about cocaine. So apparently there's just tons of cocaine going. And also the cocaine from Ecuador, it's all going to Europe. Hardly any of it's going to the United States. So for those three reasons, the DEA is like, we're not actually even interested in going to Ecuador. And I just found it interesting, because it's rare for bureaucrats to ever not want to get their noses into something, right? So it's just very interesting. But they're saying that in Washington, D.C. right now, everything's about fentanyl and busting fentanyl rings and shit like that. So I found it a very interesting article. Venezuela had some interesting stuff going on. There was a story earlier this week about a military buildup. Some think tank put out this story, and they had some satellite pictures. Later on in the week, the United States officials came out and said this is kind of a non-issue, a non-story. So that's what this guy, you take everything he says with a grain of salt, but that's what John Kirby said. He said that what the think tank, the report they posted earlier, it's not really a military buildup. It's only a small amount of forces, and they are basically sensationalizing it, he said, with it in not so many words. So there's that. So I think I covered most of this stuff. I'm going to leave it there. What happened in Poland? This was a survey from RT about attitude to Ukrainians shifting dramatically in Poland. So apparently the numbers of the favorability towards Ukrainians has gone down. It's a significant amount, but it's not like nobody likes Ukrainians. There's still lots of Poles that sympathize with the Ukrainians, but it's a significant drop in the sort of attitude, positive attitude towards Ukrainians. Kill some of these. Yeah, that's about it. Pretty quick, pretty easy. So, what happened in Mexico? Did I cover that? Yeah, regulators. Oh, here we have a good one. So, we have Malay, who is turning out to be basically a Soros pawn, and he's trying to get the Pope to come back to Argentina. Apparently, the Pope hasn't been to his home country in 20 years or something like that, maybe even more. And Malay wants him to come back. Now, we all know that the Pope hangs out with Soros and those types of people and the World Economic Forum and Zelensky, and so does Malay. So they're like a match made in heaven. So we'll see how that turns out. Maybe they'll get married. Okay, that's it. I am out.